how often does a friend, coworker, or partner say something like, I need to be encouraged right now? Hardly ever, right? That's because sometimes we don't know what we need, and other times, even when we think we're asking for what we need, we're often pretty indirect. So when we realize that hidden needs exist in every conversation, we can listen with intention and try to decipher what that need is and how we might meet it as listeners.
Happy Friday. I'm Michael Kovnat, and this is the Next Big Idea Daily, quick life lessons from the best new nonfiction. Here's the question for today. Are you listening? No, are you really listening when other people are talking? I bet you could be doing it better, and so does Ximena Vengoechea, author of the 2021 book, Listen Like You Mean It, The Lost Art of True Connection. Ximena spent years doing user research for companies like Pinterest, Twitter, and LinkedIn, which means those companies hired her to listen to their users' needs and desires in order to help build better products. Our curator, Adam Grant, says her book is full of revealing, instantly applicable ideas for leveraging your strengths and overcoming your weaknesses. Here she is.
The big ideas in my book come from my experience as a user researcher at companies like Pinterest, Twitter, and LinkedIn, where I was tasked with understanding people's needs, motivations, and perceptions to help these companies build better products. So that often meant I was conducting interviews or facilitating workshops and leading field research, often in front of an audience of peers and with strangers I'd never see again. In that role, I learned a lot about how to ask good questions, how to create the space for others to say what they need to say, and how to channel my curiosity and stay present in conversation, no matter the topic of discussion. Listen Like You Mean It translates my experience in the UX lab to the real-world conversations we have every day. Today, I'm delighted to share with you 5 of the big ideas from my book. Most of us are not really listening. Most of us spend our time in conversation in what I call surface listening mode. That's when we hear enough of a conversation to be polite, or at least nod and smile, but we don't get much of the underlying meaning that's being expressed. Instead, we're often distracted or thinking up our own response to what's being said, or ready to move on and following our own agenda without questioning if our conversation partner is with us. Surface listening does little to strengthen our relationships because we don't really hear each other. So we can't get to know someone or build trust with them. On the other hand, empathetic listening is what happens when we listen beyond the surface. So we go beyond the literal, or what's being said, past the subtext, what's meant, all the way down to the emotions, what is felt. That's where the strength of our relationships lay and where real human connection occurs. Yet most of us don't spend much time in this mode. To get deep, you can bring in what I call listening mindset, and there are 3 main qualities to this mindset. The first is humility. So that's being ready to learn, not assuming we have all the right answers, even believing that we're in the presence of an expert and not judging others for their response or experience. It also means bringing in curiosity, and that's what allows us to go deeper in conversation, because we can explore someone's driving motivation or interest in a topic, if not the topic itself. And finally, there's empathy. And that's trying to understand what the other person is experiencing, even if you don't have direct experience with their given situation. It's focusing on the underlying emotions, it's putting yourself in others' shoes, and reminding yourself it's not about you, but about them. Each of these qualities helps us to center our conversation away from ourselves and toward the other person in order to really understand them. Conversations contain hidden needs. So we often enter into conversation without thinking much of it. We just sort of show up and participate in the way that feels most natural to us. But what if you knew that in every conversation, there's a need waiting to be uncovered? You might listen differently. The truth is, humans are social beings, and there's often something we want or need from our interactions with others. Sometimes conscious, sometimes not. So say a colleague vents to you about a difficult boss. Although it might just sound like a rant, there's a need they're expressing there. They might be looking for solidarity and validation from a fellow colleague to agree with them that their boss really is particularly prickly, and even reassure them that it's not their fault. Or perhaps they're in need of someone to give them a pep talk or even a potential set of solutions for how to manage the situation. Or maybe they need your witty sense of humor to lighten the topic and the mood. The point is, there's a reason they are bringing this story to you. There's a hidden need at play that they're hoping you can help meet. Of course, it would be much easier if people just told us what they needed, but how often does a friend, coworker, or partner say something like, "I need to be encouraged right now"? Hardly ever, right? That's because sometimes we don't know what we need, and other times, even when we think we're asking for what we need, we're often pretty indirect. So when we realize that hidden needs exist in every conversation, we can listen with intention and try to decipher what that need is and how we might meet it as listeners. Each of us has a natural way of showing up to listen in conversation, a particular filter we tend to listen through. Sometimes it's the perfect fit for our conversation, but sometimes it's not. When we're not paying attention, we tend to come into conversation using what I call our default listening mode. It's how we instinctively listen, and it's informed in part by our personality and our early relationships. Each listening mode has its own virtues, but when we don't match our listening mode to the moment, we can miss what's really needed and inadvertently push our conversation partner away. There are 11 modes to be aware of, and I'll quickly cover 2 of them here to show you what I mean. The first default listening mode I want to mention is the problem solver. So this is especially common among high achievers and managers. This is a group that tends to hear conversations as a problem to be solved, which is great when there really, truly is something that needs fixing, but not so great when your conversation partner isn't looking for solutions. When we stick to this listening mode, we might miss that a friend is venting not because they need a solution to their feelings, but as a means to express themselves. They may just be trying to tell you how they feel without actually needing you to change how they feel. The same mode can cause hurdles at work, too. Think about a direct report who provides an update on a project. Maybe they aren't actually asking for advice on next steps, but that's how a problem solver hears it, and that person goes ahead and gives that advice to them anyway. Well, then the direct report might start to feel micromanaged, since their update was actually just a way of saying, "Hey, I've got a lot on my plate, but I'm on it." The other default listening mode I want to mention is the identifier. Identifiers are great at finding commonalities between their conversation partner's experience and their own. That can be really comforting and make us feel less alone. If someone's sharing a tough situation, for example, maybe they're talking about a challenge with a spouse, an identifier might share a tough experience they've had too, as a way of showing they understand what their conversation partner is going through. Sometimes this is the right approach, but other times that kind of response can actually feel dismissive, like our conversation partner isn't really hearing us. We might get upset that they've compared a spousal conflict with, say, a managerial one, or feel like they're changing the subject and putting the focus on them when we haven't even finished expressing our thoughts on a difficult topic. Even though identifying is a well-meaning listening mode, just like problem solving and all the default listening modes out there, it can quickly backfire if we employ it without paying attention to what's needed in a particular moment. So the bottom line here is, you want to discover what your default listening mode is so that you can determine whether or not it's actually relevant in conversation, and lean into it if it's called for, and adapt if it's not. Asking the right questions can deepen a conversation. Have you ever asked a question in conversation and hit a dead end, maybe gotten a one-word answer? We often use what I call disconnecting questions in conversation without realizing it. So these are questions that are designed actually to lead to a yes or no response, or questions that can be answered in one word, or that even lead others to a particular response. So let's say a coworker has a big presentation coming up. Without giving it much thought, you might ask them, "Hey, are you nervous about tomorrow's presentation?" Which sounds harmless enough, but by leading with the idea of nervousness, we might have just inadvertently created added pressure for our peer to perform, or even seeded doubt that they aren't sufficiently prepared for the big event, when what we really want to know is just how they feel about it. In general, think twice before you ask a question that starts with do, is, or are, as these are often close-ended and can therefore narrow a conversation. A better choice would be to use a connecting question. These are often open-ended, and they let our conversation partner lead the way, and in part, that's why they result in richer conversations. They usually begin with how or what. So, for example, asking, "How do you feel about tomorrow's presentation?" That removes some of our bias or perception from the conversation and can lead to a truer response. You can also follow up with even smaller connecting questions that gently nudge others to continue sharing in conversation. So that might sound like, "Say more about that," or "What else?" They're super small nudges, but they tend to yield big results. Finally, one other note here is that no matter the question you ask, remember that silence is your friend. I know it's counterintuitive. Most of us hate silence in conversation, and we get uncomfortable and we start to worry if we're boring the other person or if we've said something that just isn't landing with them. But instead of rushing in to fill the void or changing the subject or suddenly talking about ourselves or even ending the conversation altogether, try to remember that silence is actually a powerful lever in conversation. It allows the other person to take up more space, even if that's initially uncomfortable. Because sometimes your conversation partner is just thinking through their response. They're not disinterested or bored with the conversation. They just need a little bit of time to process what they're thinking. So along with the questions I mentioned earlier, a little bit of silence can go a long way to deepen a conversation. Empathetic listening requires self-awareness. You have to get to know yourself in order to be there for others. Otherwise, it's all too easy to get in your own way. When we think of listening, we often think about the importance of focusing our attention outwards on our conversation partner in order to really hear them. And that's part of the story for sure, but perhaps even more crucial is drawing our attention inwards to understand ourselves too. The challenges we face when listening are personal and unique to each and every one of us. The things that prevent you from staying present, staying humble, staying empathetic, and curious in conversation will be different from the things that prevent me from doing the same. Whether you're in a good mood or stressed out, or a morning person or a night owl, or feeling emotionally charged about a topic or able to stay neutral, can all impact your ability to listen with empathy. That's why self-awareness is so key to our listening practice. If you're in tune with what you're experiencing during a conversation, be it mentally, emotionally, or physically, you can better manage your responses in the moment. If you know the kind of environment or circumstances in which you do your best listening, you can architect conversations in support of that, or acknowledge when you might not be at your best. If you're able to recognize when a conversation sets off an emotional response and begins to hinder your rational thinking and listening, you can take care to ground yourself or pause to regroup. We all have personal blockers to staying present and empathetic in conversation, but when we get to know ourselves, we can more easily be there for others.
Thank you, Ximena. Okay, listeners, you can get yourself a copy of Listen Like You Mean It using the link in the episode notes. And if you got something out of today's show, please leave us a rating or review to help others find it. That does it for us this week. These episodes were written by me, Michael Kovnat, and edited by Caleb Bissinger. We'll see you Monday.